Test mic 1, 2, 3. All right. Let's check. You're live. Are we live? Okay, I think we're live, but just let me double check it because this is a big topic for me, and this is like I think it's 7 chapters. So I wanted to have a conversational after videos for every chapter, just to clarify a few things, because I used AI to lay out my thoughts in a more formal way, a more concise way, because speaking in daily conversation is hard for me since I'm not a native English speaker, so expressing my feelings or ideas would be a little bit hard. But here's the general, let's say, for the first video, I just want to clarify a few things for those who may seek a more conversational thought. That the big premise about all of this, I think maybe we could talk about the history of this thesis. Is that the question is that, did Paul equate Jesus and the Father or the Father as equal to Yahweh, or the same beings? Like, these three characters in the mind of Paul the same person? So in order to answer that, first I had to go through a couple of standard theological, modern, later theological ideas, where the translation of the text of what Paul says can be, when you take them as they are, you can actually see what Paul is doing there. Basically, when he says, like in Philippians 2:9-11, it says that God exalted him to the highest place and gave him the name that is above every name. It's a form of, in ancient times, when an emperor is like, for example, an emperor is kicked out and a new emperor is placed on the throne, you don't actually change certain things there. Like, you will give glory to, there are just three ideas that theology says claims as proof that Paul believes Jesus to be Yahweh. And when you think about it in a way of, when you look into Paul's mind, that he actually says it, that Jesus is kind of lifted up to this ultimate authority. So in a way, he replaces Yahweh. And so he uses the language of the Old Testament, specifically the ones he quotes and changes a little bit, to glorify Jesus. And the church says that these are the proof that Yahweh and Jesus are the same, because he uses the same phrases that are way back that are found in the Old Testament. But to me, if we understand it in the context of how Paul uses all of this marriage analogy, to me, he is using those old ideas about the ultimate king from Yahweh, he takes those from Yahweh and applies it to Jesus, as if Jesus now takes over the throne of Yahweh, which is what Christianity understands, that Jesus is lifted up to the highest state. Like he has become the name, he has been given the name above every name, right? And he rules above everything else. Even the authorities, though most of them have not, changed their operation, they are essentially in rebellion now to Jesus, who has been given all of this authority. And so the proof that, theology claims to, in order to make Jesus and Yahweh as the same person, is actually a way for Paul to say that Jesus is now the greatest. Because, if you use those terms, if you use those titles or, statements about Yahweh in the past, that would make Yahweh the greatest, right? And now Jesus now has those like banners. Jesus now uses those banners, So I think you understand what I mean. That let me find the phrases exactly here. For example, curious, right? So the Bible uses two words like theos and kyrios, right? Kyrios means Lord, right? And then theos is God, right? So when Paul applies kyrios to Jesus, people saying that, okay, look, kyrios is Yahweh, right? Now, this is the sacred name of Yahweh. So if Kyrios is Yahweh and Jesus is Kyrios, then Jesus is Yahweh, which is wrong, right? So the Lord is a title. It's a station, right? It's a Lord. He's a master. And now Jesus is called as a master. And taking note of Philippians, let's always keep that in mind, that in Philippians, Paul is saying that Jesus is lifted up. He's given a higher authority, right? So they can't be the same person, right? Like the statement in Isaiah 5, like it says, every knee will bow to Yahweh alone, right? In Isaiah. And then Paul uses that on Jesus, like every knee will bow to Jesus, right? And that thing, then theology would say, oh, see, Jesus and Yahweh are the same, but it doesn't have to be, right? You can apply that statement that every knee shall bow, and Paul never says every knee will bow to Yahweh. He never says that. He says every knee will bow to Jesus. So in a way, Paul is replacing Yahweh with Jesus. He's not equating both of them, but in his mind, Jesus has now taken over the seat of Yahweh. So since Yahweh was the God of the Old Testament, Jesus now takes over that station, right? So God is not a condition or a state. It is a position, right? It's, I don't know, maybe we'll contradict on that, but to me, being a God Does not speak about your, but that's how we were taught about it. But since there are many gods, some false, some not real, right? So being a god is like defining someone based on what how he operates, what his function is, right? So it's like a job, like a doctor, right? It doesn't speak about your personality, your being. It speaks about your job, right? It's clear if you study it. Anyway, there's a lot of things we can talk about this, and I'm going to make videos about that. But I think I'm gonna still continue to use AI, seeing that I'm just losing my train of thought just by trying to translate my thoughts with into English. So there's also the one God, one Lord, that is found in Corinthians 8, chapter 8, verse 6, where Paul uses the Shema. Like, this is the ultimate Jewish declaration of Yahweh's singular supremacy, right? It says, "Hear, O Israel, Yahweh our God, Yahweh is one." Right? He splits it. Paul uses that same thing, same word, but splits it. He assigns the title Theos, God, to the Father, but he assigns Kyrios, Lord, to Jesus. So by implication, he gives Jesus the active title of Kyrios, and demanding that all prayers, needs, and confession go to Jesus. So in a way, Paul is, in a way, pushing Yahweh away, like to the side, while, replacing him with Jesus. So in a way, instead of saying Yahweh is one, you're changing it, right? He's changing it. So there's a lot of ways we can look into this, but in my studies, I found that, my contradiction with the normal Western theology is that they use these things as a proof that Jesus is Yahweh, but in reality, when you study Paul's words, like in a whole, as a whole, without using other later, harmonization. That's why I pointed out in the primary thesis video that we have to isolate Paul's thought in order to capture more Paul's thoughts. We need to isolate his writings and learn from, and look into those writings alone to see what he thinks. Because, even in his time, people are misunderstanding him, right? Just as we find it in the text. So in a way, we avoid the later harmonization, the later theological. That's why I mentioned it in the thesis video, part 1. But the point there is, in order to be clear, in order to be pure in our pursuit, to understand how Paul sees the cosmos and what's happening, what's going on, we need to isolate his letters, confirmed letters, and study those to see what he thinks. So, excuse me. Okay, slight trouble. Anyway, so next part, okay, that goes through two things, right? So the origin of this thesis and why now I wanted to see deeper what Paul really thinks, how he really sees the cosmos, what's happening, who Jesus is, where does everyone land? Where do we land in all of this? Where do the law land in all this? Right? So first I chose this specific marriage analogy that he's saying because it's very obvious here, right? In order for this thing to be logical, to be, functional, there has to be two different beings there, two husbands. One is the old husband, which is the one of the law or the Torah, and the other is Jesus, right? And Jesus and the Father cannot be separated because they are one. Okay, Jesus himself said that if his own kingdom is divided against itself, it won't stand. So in a way, this modern interpretation, this harmonization, this theological thing that we learned through Bible school or through the church is that we're being told that it's a single household, it's a single husband, right? It's like saying there's only one husband, God, and then he has two houses, right? And if you live on one house, then you have different rules there, right? And if you live in another house, you have different rules there. So it's crazy that we think about it like this, because in a way the kingdom of God is divided if we look at it like that. Okay, so let's say it's not divided because it's just one system, right? But that's why I focused on this analogy of Paul, of the marriage, because you cannot be divorced from your old husband and be married to him again, right? Or at the same time be married to him. It doesn't make sense. Like, you divorce him, you die, you divorce him, and then you remarry to him. It doesn't make sense. Because again, Jesus said, to God, everyone is alive. So it doesn't matter if you're alive or dead to the real God, to his Father. What matters here, as we see, is that there are two husbands in this analogy that Paul is saying. He's saying that there are two entities here with two different rules. One has the law of spirit, and one has the law of the Torah, right? And he says that the Torah will lead to death. It's a curse. And then on the second hand, it's redemption. It's a promise, unbreakable promise when you come here. It's about restoration. It's about healing. It's about, being restored. So there are two. It's very important to me that these two husbands, or this analogy of Paul, is very clear. It shows that there are two entities here, right? We can also say that similar to, in their world before, in the ancient Rome, like there are two rules side by side going on the street, right? If you're a citizen, there are different rules that apply to you. And if you're a slave or a foreigner, there's a different rule applying to you. and it's the same empire, right? But why didn't Paul use that, right? And he didn't even use the as an analogy the way that the Romans, transfer adoption, right? In Roman adoption, your father has to sell you to the third party 3 times. And when he sells you to the other party 3 times, he's, when you belong to in a household in Rome, everything about you is owned by your father, your income, everything. And if you want to transfer to another family, your father has to sell you 3 times to the other party. And once that happens, everything about you in this old family is erased, right? And now you're like a new person there in the new family, right? So this is why this is also there in the mind of Paul's audience and himself, but he didn't use this. He uses the marriage because it's impossible to be married and divorced both at the same time. So my point is, I'm seeing this. Why did Paul use this analogy? Because he wants to say there are two things, there are two entities here working. But unlike, I also clarified it that this is not a Gnostic or Marcionite idea, right? Those things came after, and they built upon maybe a vague idea of Paul's thoughts. They built on it and made it something else, right? To fit their own ideas. Excuse me. But, just focusing on Paul, that's why I didn't want to go. I intentionally added that to part 1 in order to clarify that this is not a Marcionite or a Gnostic take, because it's easy for let's say non-scholarly inclined people, just like me before. I'm just churchgoer. I never even read my Bible until I went into Bible school myself, and I found all of these things as we studied the New Testament, the Old Testament. So I found all these things and started asking questions, and sometimes you have to dig deeper, but none of us have that time. So we see here that this is never not Paul's mind is not the same as what the Gnostics or the Marcionite says. So in Paul, he never mentions, it doesn't say that Yahweh is evil. Okay, because I'll be making a video about that. Though he did something that may be questionable, and he did order things that may not be, that we could say evil, and that of course that makes him evil. And Jesus himself says that the father of those Pharisees he's talking to was evil, murderer, all of that. Here in our study, we don't include any of that, right? We just stick to Paul right here, right? So we see that according to Paul, he never says that Yahweh is evil. He doesn't say that Yahweh is good either, right? He just focuses on the law, right? The law is good, right? Now, in my video, I said something that might be mistaken. People might say the opposite, that, oh, see, he's saying that Yahweh is good, but no, it's never said in the video. In the thesis video, it says that Paul never says that Yahweh is evil, in contrast to how the Gnostic idea, or the Marcionite idea, says that, Yahweh is inherently evil, right? Paul never says that. He doesn't deny or confirm that, but he just says that the law is okay, it's good, right? And it is a guardian. It serves as like a fence, right? It's not the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is Jesus, not the fence, right? So, but we're gonna make a video about that too. We're gonna clarify some of that. But for now, focusing on this, I just wanted to clarify that this is not a Marcionite or a Gnostic take on the Bible, because we have a lot of that, and I don't agree. I don't agree, because I see Yahweh as, someone who's been given authority. He was not, of all his siblings. In Psalms, we see that in all his siblings, when his siblings was failing, right? They were not being just to the widow, to the fatherless, right? And crime is going off all the way. So tells him that he is to rise up, or he will inherit the nations, right? So in a way, that Psalm says that Yahweh was given the nations because his siblings failed. So he was given the all of this responsibility, right? And he has this law now that he wants to spread all over the world, but then it went sideways, and before he could even implement the entire law to the entire world, the purpose of the law came. So Jesus came before he could do his global domination, right? That was his goal. His goal was to take over all of the nations, apply the law to them, and according to Paul here, the law is just a guardrail, a fence to keep things together until the seed came. But I think I'm going to be discussing that. It's part of the thesis in part 2, I think. So just focusing on this part 1, that's the point. Paul never says that Yahweh is good. He doesn't also say that Yahweh is evil. He just focuses on the law, what the law is, and the purpose of the law, right? I think no, that's not in the purpose of the law is not in the video 1, part 1. Video 1 is all about contrasting, trying to separate ourselves now from the Marcionite and the Gnostic idea, and then later to clarify why the law and what the flesh is, right? Why the flesh cannot fulfill the law, and separating the flesh, the idea of the flesh, from the Gnostic and the Marcionite ideas. So in Paul's perspective, the flesh is just representing in our human failure, our incapacity to fulfill the law, and our tendency to be triggered because of the law, it actually brings out evil. You know? So Paul is stating that the flesh is our natural human being, right? This is how we are. The flesh is defined because of the law. When the law existed, the flesh is defined. So we see ourselves because of the law, right? Without the law, we would not know what coveting is. It means without the law, we would not know that we are weak, right? So we would not see the flesh if there was no law, right? So this is the point of Paul. So for Paul, he points out that the law is never bad. The flesh is the way it is, and we see how the flesh is the way it is because of the law. And without the law, we would not see what the flesh is. And then he says that because of these two realities, the law is never meant to save. It's never meant for salvation. Right? This is what Paul is thinking. The law is just a fence to keep things together until the seed comes, which is Jesus. And then actually the salvation happens in the Spirit. Right? Through the Spirit, reformation happens. Right? And then that's the redemption. Right? So, in a way, he's saying, in his words, that you guys misunderstood the law. The law is not something that will save us. No. The law is actually something that showed us who we are. Right? And because of that, because of the misunderstanding, right? And because of the stipulations of the law, we are now cursed. We are now bound to condemnation and death. And if we keep on going on that direction, that we're trying to fulfill the law to find righteousness towards God, then we're going to fail. And we're going to feel condemned because we cannot use the law as a basis for righteousness. In fact, the law is a mirror that shows that we are not righteous. So this is the point that Paul is trying to say, right? I don't think that's in the thesis video because, it's just an addition. So basically that's what the flesh is expounded, right? To expound on the idea of the flesh. Anyway, that's it for me for now. And I think I'm gonna make the second video maybe later this week, maybe second, depends if I have free time. So I hope you keep posted, comment, and I hope this conversation brought something, a clarification, like we have all of this confusion about the law, about the flesh, about the kingdom, about Jesus, Yahweh, the Father. We have all of this confusion about all of this. So I think even right now, it's clear that we have reached some kind of clarity, at least regarding the law and the flesh. And the difference or the separation between Jesus and Yahweh. right? Based on Paul's analogy, right? It's clear that you need to have two husbands, or else it's just a massive insanity. You know, it just doesn't make sense to be, you know, you divorce your husband and then marry him again tomorrow. And then now you're saying you belong to a new husband. It's crazy. Even if you change where you get married, it doesn't matter. It's the same husband. So you cannot divorce and marry him at the same time. So there has to be two masters here, two lords, or two husbands in this case, right? So Jesus, kingdom Jesus, kingdom law, kingdom Yahweh. All right? So that's it for me, and I'll catch you next time.